My name is Louise. Standing at the entrance of the church on my wedding day, I was supposed to take that significant walk down the aisle on my father's arm. But instead, he firmly declared, "I won't walk you down the aisle because your groom, in my eyes, is not one of us. Walk alone and think about what you've done." As I let go of his arm and waited for the wedding march, a mix of emotions swirled within me. I was hurt, confused, and yet there was a strange sense of calm, as if I'd been expecting this all along. When the double doors finally swung open, the light flooded in, and I was no longer alone. The man who offered me his arm was my Uncle Henry, someone my father hadn't seen in 30 years. The shock on my father's face was palpable, and I knew that this moment would change everything. What he did at that door, in front of the whole town, would be a decision he'd have to explain for the rest of his life. Let me take you back to the time when I decided to tell my parents I was engaged. I was living in the city, far from the small town where I grew up. I'd left home at 18 with big dreams and a half scholarship, and I'd worked hard to pay for the rest of my education in veterinary school. Now, I was a veterinarian, treating all kinds of animals, from the tiniest kittens to the largest horses. My fiancé, Max, was a musician. He was the kind of man who could turn a simple tune into a masterpiece and make people's hearts soar. We'd been together for 4 years, and I knew he was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. One day, I decided it was time to tell my parents the news. I drove back to the family farm, a place filled with memories. The farm had been in our family for generations, and my parents, John and Sarah, had worked hard to keep it running. My father, John, was a tough-minded man, always set in his ways. My mother, Sarah, was more gentle, but she often deferred to my father's decisions. When I told them about Max, my father's reaction was immediate. He frowned and said, "A musician? He's not the kind of man we expected you to marry. He doesn't have a stable job, and he's not from our kind of background." My mother just looked at me with a sad expression, but she didn't say a word. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I wanted them to get to know Max. So, I invited him to come for dinner the next Sunday. My mother set the table with the good china, the one we only used for special occasions. My father shook Max's hand, but it was a cold and perfunctory gesture. During the dinner, the conversation was stilted. My father talked about the farm and the latest market prices, while Max tried to join in, but it was clear he was out of place. Then, my mother's favorite cat got sick. Max, without hesitation, examined the cat and quickly diagnosed the problem. He treated the cat right there, and soon, the cat was purring again. My mother looked at Max with a newfound respect, but my father still wasn't convinced. He asked, "Where are you from, exactly?" The room fell silent, and I could feel the tension in the air. Around that time, an old neighbor, Mr. Thompson, became my patient. He was in his 80s and had a heart condition. I'd known him my whole life, and he was like a second grandfather to me. One day, while I was changing his sheets, he looked at me and said, "You know, your family has a history you don't know about." I was curious and asked him what he meant. He told me that my father and Uncle Henry had a big fight 30 years ago. Uncle Henry had married a woman from a different cultural background, and my father couldn't accept it. There were family gatherings that ended in arguments, and eventually, Uncle Henry left the family. My father always told me that Uncle Henry had just walked away, chasing a new life and leaving his family behind. But Mr. Thompson said there was more to the story. He said that my grandmother, Elizabeth, had wanted the family to stay together, but my father was too stubborn. As the wedding plans progressed, I knew I wanted my father to walk me down the aisle. I wanted to give him a chance to be the father I'd always hoped he'd be. So, one evening, I sat down with him at the kitchen table and asked, "Dad, will you walk me down the aisle?" He didn't answer right away. He took a long time to chew his food, then set his fork down. He looked at Max and said, "I won't stand up in front of that church for this. He's not one of us. If you want to go through with this, do it without me. Walk yourself in and think about what you're doing to this family." I felt a knot in my stomach, but Max reached over and took my hand. I looked at my father and said, "All right, Dad. Then I'll find someone who will." After that, the family group chat on our phones exploded. My aunt wrote that I was breaking my father's heart on purpose, and my brother said I was causing unnecessary drama. My mother didn't say anything in the group, but she texted me privately, asking me not to make things worse. I didn't respond. I knew that arguing with them wouldn't change anything. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found Uncle Henry's number. I hadn't spoken to him in a long time, but I knew he was the one who could understand me. 2 days later, I drove to Uncle Henry's place. It was in a different part of the state, in a small town surrounded by beautiful forests. His wife, Maya, met me at the door with a warm smile and a big hug. Their daughter, Lily, was also there. I sat in their cozy kitchen, and Uncle Henry poured me a cup of coffee. He looked at me and said, "Your grandmother used to love having family gatherings in a kitchen just like this one. You remember her laugh?" I told him I did. It was a sound that always made me feel safe and loved. He then said, "There's a part of our family history you were never told. Your grandmother wanted the family to be united, but your father couldn't let go of his prejudices. He told me that my grandmother had written a will, leaving the family farm to both my father and him equally. But my father, in his grief and anger after Uncle Henry's marriage, had convinced Uncle Henry to sign a quit-claim deed, giving up his share of the farm." I was shocked. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mr. Thompson, on his last days, gave me a folder containing a copy of my grandmother's will and the quit-claim deed. He said he'd kept these for years, hoping that one day, the truth would come out. As the wedding rehearsal approached, my father made sure to make his point in front of everyone. When the pastor asked who would walk me down the aisle, my father stood up and said, "I've made myself clear. I won't be a part of this. Think long and hard about who you're choosing over your own family." He then stormed out of the hall, leaving everyone in silence. But I was determined. I knew that I couldn't let his narrow-mindedness ruin my special day. The night before the wedding, I had doubts. I thought about my mother's plea and the potential impact on the family. But then, I remembered a memory from my childhood. Uncle Henry had taken me fishing once, and he'd been so patient with me, teaching me how to cast the line and how to be quiet so as not to scare the fish. That memory gave me the strength to go through with my plan. On the wedding day, as I stood at the door, Uncle Henry stepped up beside me. He crooked his arm, and I slid my hand through it. We walked down the aisle together, and as we did, I heard my father shout, "He's not one of us. He doesn't belong here." But I didn't let his words affect me. I kept my voice low and said, "You told me to walk alone, Dad." I thought about it, and I decided not to. The pastor, an old and wise man, looked at the room and said, "Friends, we are here to witness a marriage. Shall we continue?" The room, filled with people who had come to support me, said yes in a low murmur. At the reception, my father confronted Uncle Henry. He said, "You came back for the land, didn't you? After all these years, you show up just when there's a chance to get a piece of the farm." I took out the folder and placed it on the table. I said, "This is the truth. Uncle Henry never came for the land. He came for the family, for me, and for anyone who's ever been told they're not good enough." My brother, who had taken out a large loan to expand the farm, turned pale. He knew that the unadministered will and the clouded title could put his plans at risk. My father looked at the folder, and for the first time, he was speechless. He realized that his actions over the years had been wrong, and he'd been holding on to a grudge for no good reason. In the weeks that followed, a lawyer filed a petition to reopen the administration of my grandmother's estate and set aside the 1996 transfer. The bank froze my brother's expansion loan until the matter was resolved. The community slowly began to see the truth. People who had always sided with my father started to question his actions. My mother, who had been silent for so long, finally found the courage to speak up. A few weeks after the wedding, we all gathered at Uncle Henry's place. We sat on the porch, reading the old Christmas cards he'd sent over the years. There were laughs and tears, and for the first time in a long time, the family felt united. As we went inside for dinner, Uncle Henry held the door open for everyone. He said, "In this house, the door waits for everybody." I've thought a lot about that moment and what it means. Family isn't about blood and land, it's about who shows up, who holds the door, and who accepts you for who you are. My father thought us was about a narrow definition, but the whole church and the whole community taught him what us really means.